It's not that AI is going to replace therapists. It's that AI may fill a gap for individuals who are never going to see therapists anyway. And so I think that there will always be a need for human-to-human connection and those with extreme training to help those that really need it. But I also think if we can help people that are not getting any help at all, and if we can do it safely and effectively, then I think that's a win-win.
Hello, and welcome to Season 2 of Beyond the Couch, AI in Psychology. I'm your host, Dr. Ernest Wayde. Now, as always, before we get started, I want to thank the organizations that make this podcast possible. This episode is sponsored by the American Board of Professional Psychology, the National Register of Health Service Psychologists, and my consulting firm, Wade AI. Their support helps us create thoughtful, psychology-focused conversations about how AI is shaping our field. All right, so I am really very excited for you to meet our guest today, because today's guest sits at the intersection of psychology, innovation, and healthcare policy. She's helped shape how our field thinks about technology, data, and emerging tools at a national level, and what responsible progress actually looks like for psychologists and the people we serve. This is a chance to hear how those decisions are being approached from inside the profession. Our guest today is Dr. Vaile Wright. Dr. Wright is the inaugural Senior Director of the Office of Healthcare Innovation at the American Psychological Association. She's a licensed psychologist and researcher focusing on how technology and data can improve access, efficiency, and quality in mental health care at both the individual and the system levels. As a national spokesperson for APA, she's been featured by CNN, NBC News, the New York Times, and NPR on topics including telehealth, AI, and access to care. Vaile, wow. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Ernest.
I'm so glad you're here. That's such an impressive list. I'm really looking forward to diving in with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are and how you got interested working with innovation and AI.
Sure. So, I'm a counseling psychologist by training. I think what was really unique about my training is that I had a professor that actually sat in multiple different spaces. She was an IL professor, a counseling professor, and a clinical psych professor. And so I think that gave me a more well-rounded look at the world from a real scientific practitioner kind of space. I've been at APA now it'll be 12 years. And when I started, it was really around how do we measure quality? And that was born out of work I'd been doing as a practitioner and a training director, really thinking about, we have all these patients coming to all these sessions and groups, and are they actually getting better? So that's where my passion really started. And to be quite frank, I kind of fell into the innovation space. Our office that I oversee now was established about 5-6 years ago, ironically, right before the pandemic. And we just sort of took off running, thinking about, this was a really obvious but unique opportunity to be thinking about the role that technology was clearly going to play in a way that we'd never seen in our lifetime before. And if I'm being even more honest, I wasn't even trained in telehealth, right? That's even before my training days. So I think with the help of membership and with experts in the space and the advisory committee that we've established to help guide our strategy, that's really how we got into the space. And I think it's a critical time for APA to really demonstrate leadership, to bring that subject matter expertise we have across the membership and across all of psychological science, to be thinking about, to your point, how do we do this responsibly, ethically, effectively, and safely?
Yeah, I love that background. I especially love the background of how your office got set up 5 to 6 years ago, because telehealth came and now AI is here, which is, one of the very important things that we need to be talking about. So I want to dive right into it because I know that you speak nationally and also at local levels. So tell us from that perspective in terms of what are you seeing in terms of AI applications at those levels? And how are we as psychologists generally feeling about it? What are the feelings, the challenges, the advantages, the risks? What are you hearing when you're out in the field talking about these things?
For the last at least year, we've seen really the same two basic market trends when it comes to AI and mental health. One, our products marketed to providers. And so those are typically your ambient scribes that record your therapy sessions, provide your progress note, etc.
Yeah.
The other trend, of course, is conversational chatbots, right? These are really geared towards consumers, and they are just consuming the conversation, for lack of a better word. And it's all that we seem to be talking about. Now, these AI marketed tools towards providers, you're seeing some traction. When we do our practitioner pulse survey annually, what we saw was nearly a 50% jump in psychologists saying that they use AI at least a little bit in their work. So it went from like 25% to almost 60%. But with that increased usage was increased concern. So you're also seeing psychologists reporting a better awareness of worries around data breaches, around the sensitivity of this data. How is it being trained? Where is it going? And so you see some curiosity, but you're also seeing some hesitation. And for sure, psychologists, not the fastest adopters of new technology, and hesitant, probably rightfully so, right? We're talking about really sensitive data when we're talking about psychotherapy or behavioral health. So, I think when I give talks, usually one or two brave people in the audience will say, yeah, I've used a scribe before. But most people, I think, are still very, very hesitant.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that hesitancy is something that I've seen as well when I speak with this group. From what you're hearing, what is the cause of that hesitancy? Why are they hesitant to use these tools? And is it a reasonable thing to be hesitant given how risky some of these things can be?
I do think it's reasonable to be hesitant, but I don't think that it's reasonable to just outright think that these tools are unethical. And that's sometimes what I hear from people. When you think about the evolution of technology, this is really just in some ways the next step. When I was trained, we had the two-way mirror, and you had a supervisor on the other side of it. Then we had, audio recordings of sessions, and then we had maybe video recordings of sessions. And now I think the next step is the use of software to help record those sessions. And so I think when you think about it in a continuum, it feels a little bit less scary that this isn't that different than what we've done before. It's just the new way of moving it forward. And I always encourage providers of all sorts to just be curious, to try some of these tools out on your own, see ways in which they feel less scary and more helpful, because they are just a tool. And a tool is only as good as how we use it.
Yeah.
And so there are ways to use these tools responsibly. Unfortunately, right now, it does require a bit of legwork on the part of the provider, because there are so many tools in the marketplace. It's really flooded at the moment, and it can be hard to tell what's good from what's bad.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, especially the angle of look at it as a tool that can be helpful to you in what you do. So let's dive into that a little bit. From what you're hearing and what you know of these tools, what are they actually doing that can be helpful to psychologists, in the work that we do as we're providing clinical care?
I think most of us as psychologists, when we went to training and went to school, we weren't thinking about having to do all the documentation, all the paperwork, all the tasks that maybe could be automated that we just don't particularly enjoy and maybe take time away from us having face-to-face time with the clients that we really want to work with. So the degree to which these tools can help reduce that time, reduce that burden, improve efficiency, I think that's going to be great. I don't know that we have the data yet to really support the impact that these tools are having on a large scale. I hope that data is coming, and we've been encouraging companies to be thinking about how could you collect data, real world data even, that would help demonstrate just how efficient these tools are being. But one of the best use cases I've heard for using these, and again, this came from a psychologist that was, in the audience of one of the state psychological associations I was speaking to. And she was talking about how, because of some physical health conditions, she had lost some of her mobility and wasn't able to type as quickly as she had before. And that she found this tool to be just unbelievably helpful for her in terms of taking away that degree of burden that she was experiencing, on a day-to-day basis in her work.
Yeah, I love that example of how the tool can be helpful. I do some work in the medical field, and that field is more advanced in terms of how they're using that as a scribe. But it wasn't a smooth journey. They had bumps and ups and downs as well before they smoothed it out. So I think there's definitely the potential for that in the world of psychology as well. One of the things that I also hear when I'm talking with people is the fear that AI is going to replace them in what they do, right? What are you hearing in terms of that from the field? And what do you agree with that, or what do you think is actually the case going on here?
It's a really interesting question. And admittedly, I think my thinking about it has shifted a bit from if you would ask me this question 1 year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I was at a conference recently talking with an old colleague of mine, and they were saying, what if a psychologist just set up, in essence, a digital twin kind of chatbot
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
just he pro-offered to everybody and everybody could just use it, and that's how they received their therapy.
Hmm.
And what I really wanted to say to him was, what's wrong with that? Right? Like, I mean, I think when we put into the context of we have a huge mental health crisis, not just in this country, but globally.
Hmm.
And there are going to be people who are needlessly suffering all the time. And some of those people are never going to walk through our doors for a variety of reasons, some very legitimate, by the way. So where I'm thinking about this now is it's not that AI is going to replace therapists.
Yeah.
It's that AI may fill a gap for individuals who are never going to see therapists anyway,
Mm.
right? And so I think that there will always, always, always be a need for human to human connection and those with extreme training to help those that really, really need it. But I also think if we can help people that are not getting any help at all,
Hmm.
and if we could do it safely and effectively, then I think that's a win-win. The problem is, as I see it, at least currently, the technology is not good enough yet.
I love that perspective of it can be helpful, right? If the technology is actually functioning appropriately and is well tested. So let's dive into where the policy is right now in terms of supporting that, because one of the things about AI is constantly evolving. So what might not have been something that worked, as you said, kind of like you're thinking, what might not have worked last year in a few months might actually work, right? And so where is APA in terms of keeping up with the policies and helping the field figure out what we should be doing and what we shouldn't be doing and where the boundaries are as it comes to these things?
Yeah, it's an incredibly chaotic space, I would argue, and has been for a while. And that's in part because even before this administration and the previous administration as well, there has been no comprehensive federal policy as it relates to AI. And
Hmm.
so the way that AI has been regulated is really through the marketplace and through complaints made in civil litigation, right? And so that's really what sparked a lot of the conversation I think you're having at both the state and the national level was very high profile lawsuits,
Yeah.
naming different companies as causing public harm with the way that their technology was operating, in particular conversational chatbots, either as a general purpose LLM or as a companionship type of
Hmm.
offering, right? And so at APA, we went to the FTC, to the Federal Trade Commission to express our concerns about what was happening around mismarketing of these tools as representing themselves as actual, licensed providers. That has helped carry some of the narrative at the federal level. So you saw most recently in, say, September through around December that the FTC did end up launching an investigation across various different companies,
Hmm.
that APA gave both congressional and Senate testimony around the use of AI. And then that led to a couple of different federal bills and an executive order that was launched in December. But in the midst of all this, what you really see in the movement is at the state level, where
Hmm.
states have taken it into their own hands in the absence of federal legislation to try to protect the public, in particular, protect children around the harmful uses of AI. And so I know in the current legislation session coming up, we have at least 15 or so state bills that have been proposed around AI regulation. And I sympathize with the states. I really do, because they want to do something to protect their citizens. And at the same time, this patchwork approach can have very unintended consequences, particularly for providers who
Yeah.
work interjurisdictionally. Also, while some of the legislation is really good and could probably make a difference, particularly those that are geared towards ensuring developers don't misrepresent their AI as a human or as a licensed psychologist, others lack nuance and also could have unintended consequences for providers by preventing them to use effective tools that are AI based in the future.
Hmm.
So much like how AI is rapidly evolving in its sophistication of technology, the laws around it are also just rapidly accelerating. And it's
Yeah.
incredibly challenging to keep up.
Yeah, I completely agree. Incredibly challenging to keep up and chaotic, to use your word, in terms of what is going on. So, the world as you've described it, there's some things happening at the federal level, there's some things happening at the state level. You mentioned that we're trying to get technology developers to clearly state what the boundaries of their tools are. But we also know that even things like LLMs, which are not generally used for mental health care, people still are using these things. So in this context of just this wild, wild west, as I like to call it, what is the role of a psychologist, do you think, in terms of educating ourselves, educating our clients, educating the public? What is our role here as things are constantly in flux?
Yeah, I think our role is multifaceted, right? So, I think we do have a responsibility to make sure that we are educated enough, and that's tricky, right? What is enough on these different types of technologies, tools, and for me, most importantly, the business models that underlie them, because that often then helps you understand the motivation and the intention behind some of these tools. I don't know that it's necessary that people or psychologists understand the technology specifications behind these tools. I'll be honest, I don't. But it's more about what's the implication of these tools, both for people, for relationships, for their emotional well-being, for how they continue to interact in a world that is seemingly increasingly isolating and lonely. I think psychologists, first and foremost, have a responsibility to educate themselves. I do think that psychologists who are seeing clients in whatever setting they're in probably needs to start approaching every client, whether new or established, with the expectation that they're using these tools in some way or another.
Yeah.
And because the data suggests that, over 70% of adolescents are using these on a daily basis. 50% of adults say they're using it for mental health purposes specifically. And so we just need to, I think, start assuming that that's the case. And so assessment's going to be really important, reassessment, and then, asking questions around, why are they using these tools? What is it that they're getting from these tools that they can't get in other aspects of their life? And again, I think that through line of curiosity is really important and non-judgment. And we're really good at that as psychologists. But I think this is a whole new way of applying it that we hadn't thought about before.
Yeah, I love those points that you're making. And I think one of the things that's really important is even we look at some of the research that came out last year in terms of it's now thought that AI is the biggest mental health provider because there's so many people using AI. And so really important to ask the question, are you using it? Why are you using it? I think it's important for our field to understand why people are using these tools, but also really important for us to understand the value that we can bring that AI doesn't bring. I think that's one of the things that's critical is we bring great value as clinicians, with our critical professional judgment, accountability, relationships that we have with people. So I think really understanding those things can be very important so that we can then have more peace of mind that we bring value so that we can then figure out how our clients can potentially get value from the tool. So let me ask you a little bit about looking forward towards the future. Where do you think we're heading for as a profession in terms of, you mentioned the advancements we talked through, recording, telehealth. Where do you see the future going with AI now?
We're going to continue to see the desire on the part of the public and patients to engage with these tools as a way to address uncertainty about their personal lives, right? That's why they're going to these tools, is wanting some answers about what's happening with them and why their life is the way that they are. I think the future challenge for us as a profession in our field is how do we convince people that even though that feels very satisfactory to go to tools to address these, that actually doing the harder thing, which is therapy and or engaging in real human relationships, is the better option. I think that's where we're going to. I think that's the crossroads we're literally at. Where how do we demonstrate the value add of not just therapy, human to human therapy, but actual human relationships? When the AI makes things seem so much easier, right? It is so much easier to have the AI tell you it's not you, it's them. You're perfect just the way you are. Right?
Well, I am, right? So,
right, well, of course you are. Well, you are, Ernest. I mean, clearly. But, how do we convince people that, well, that feels really good. Doing this other thing that feels really hard is really better for you in the long term.
Yeah.
Right? Because we as therapists, we are validating, right? but it's a but and, right? It's a validate and. It's,
Yeah.
I understand, it makes so much sense to me that you feel this way after that thing happened to you. And here's a healthier way to be thinking about it, right?
Mhm.
It's that but and, it's that and that technology currently can't do,
Mhm.
right? And I think if we cannot help people understand that not only that is more valuable
Yeah.
than prolonged conversations with AI, right? I'm not talking about AI at 3 a.m, you're having a panic attack and it tells you to breathe and you feel better. That's great.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
real positive use case. I'm talking about the replacement of human connection via AI because it's easier,
Mhm.
right? Because I get concerned at an existential level of what happens if we continue to overvalue an
Mhm.
AI relationship at the sacrifice of a human relationship. And we lose the things that make human relationships so valuable: reciprocity,
Mhm.
a sense of giving, not just receiving, of shared decision making and, actual physical engagement in some way or another. And so I think that's the future crossroads we're going to be at. I'm very curious to see how it goes.
Yeah, I completely agree. Right. And I think even some of the hard things, right? Because as psychologists, we also challenge. When you have human to human relationships, there's conflict. And so you have to do conflict resolution. All of those things are things that you learn through engaging through human to human interaction. But if your AI is like anything like mine, it always tells me that I'm right and that I've always got the best ideas, And so why wouldn't I keep going back to that? Because everyone likes to feel good about themselves, but that can be dangerous, as you're pointing out.
Yeah, I mean, because the hallmark of so many psychological issues and disorders is avoidance,
Hmm.
right? And AI is the perfect tool to fuel avoidance.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because it'll tell you exactly what you want. And so you don't need to avoid it. In fact, it makes it so that you crave it because you want to keep going back for that validation that you're getting from it. So what do you think in terms of the psychologist's role in the future as we're talking about clinical care and mental health care? Do you envision a role? Because you mentioned where, somebody mentioned creating a chatbot where it functions similar to them. Do you envision a role where a lot of that is going to be happening, where everybody sort of creates chatbots that can mimic the work and their style? Or do you envision it being something a little bit different where it's more of a supportive tool? What do you think is going to be happening?
Yeah, I fear it's going to be the proliferation of chatbots that are replicating the model that currently exists. And part of my fear of that is I think it's short-sighted,
Hmm.
right? I think that one of the most critical potential applications of AI would be the integration of them into digital therapeutics, particularly prescription digital therapeutics. These are clinically validated, evidence-based treatment
Yeah.
protocols that are digitized and
Hmm.
delivered via software under the purview or, supervision of a provider, right?
Yes.
And part of the knock on prescription digital therapeutics is the lack of engagement that happens. So if we could use conversational chatbots to improve that engagement, it's
Uh-huh.
not really the chatbot that's delivering the intervention. It's still the evidence-based intervention that's happening. It's just
Hmm.
being magnified or improved by this new technology. That's, I think, an exciting possibility. And
Yeah.
so while I haven't seen any of those that have either cleared through the FDA yet or have even been on the market, that's where I think there's real impact potential.
Hmm.
I am doing my roadshow, if you will, talking to people across the country. What I'm trying to encourage people to do is to think about the less sexy applications of AI. So instead of another chatbot, instead of another ambient scribe, how do we use AI to improve integrated care, right? We have a system where we expect people to see their physical doctor. And we all know that people go to their PCPs first for their mental health issues. What
Right.
if you could actually seamlessly also see a behavioral health provider at the same time and use AI to address some of the scalable burdens to this model, right?
Hmm.
Like how it
Hmm.
gets paid for, how you measure outcomes to demonstrate cost effectiveness and return on investment, right? So, how can we use AI to do some of these data things that we're not necessarily doing to improve the system that's currently in place? Because the
Hmm.
healthcare system is broken. And if we just keep pretending like it's not, we're not going to see the needed outcomes that we want.
Yeah.
Those are the types of applications. How can we improve quality using AI? Not just provide more options, although those are important, but also think about how do we improve what's currently happening in our healthcare systems today.
Yeah, I love that approach of improving healthcare overall, right? A lot of times now I see such an integration of mental health and medical care, especially because of AI. It's becoming more and more seamless. So I think there's that view about policy. We talked about federal level, we talked about the state level. Let's talk more about APA and what we can expect from APA in terms of guidance? Because I know there's a lot of psychologists out there who, some of them want to use AI, but they aren't sure what the boundaries are. They aren't sure what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing. And then others who don't want to use AI, but also want to know where the boundaries are for their patients and work that they're doing. So what should we be expecting there?
Sure. So we've put out some resources already. One is some ethical guidance geared towards health service psychologists on what are the principles and things they should be thinking about when they're approaching responsible and effective and ethical AI. So things like transparency, informed consent, these are things that we're familiar with, but how do we apply those to these new sophisticated technologies? We've also put out some resources for providers who are interested in determining whether a certain AI product is appropriate for their practice, including AI scribes. And it includes a checklist that you can go down and ask yourself questions about, the reputation of the company, what's the functionality of the software, how is the data trained? So helping psychologists think about what are the right questions to ask.
Yeah.
That being said, we know that psychologists and others don't have a lot of time to do this type of legwork. So, we have a new business unit at APA called APA Labs, and they're looking to stand up a new program that would do some of that vetting and evaluating on the behalf of providers ahead of time, and then provide a library of different types of technologies showing kind of how well they do across a variety of different evaluated categories like safety, efficacy, the technology aspects, etc. I also know that in the future, coming soon, the new APA ethics code will have a section around technology in particular and probably some additional principles around AI. And from my perspective, in our office, one of the things we're really thinking about is what are the resources that psychologists need in their practices to help them better talk about AI with their clients. So not just what are the right questions to ask for assessment and why they're using it, but what happens when your client comes to you and says, I talked to ChatGPT last night and they said the advice you gave me was bad, right? Like how do you then take that and think of it as data, right? How do you think of it as data that you would, just like any other data you would use, to then work through in your relationship, work through as the process of the therapy that you're doing. And so those are some of the things we're thinking about.
Yeah, I really appreciate that because I think that's happening already, right? In a lot of different arenas where people are bringing in what ChatGPT said and it may conflict with what you're saying. And so how do you manage that relationship and that conversation with your client when they are relying on ChatGPT because ChatGPT tells them how great they are all the time. And so they built that trust with ChatGPT. So I think that sort of guidance would be really very helpful for practitioners out there.
And I can imagine getting very defensive, right, as the therapist too, which is a totally normal reaction. But how do we, again, we're trained in this. We're trained in that transference, countertransference. How do we use that to really make gains in therapy and see it as an opportunity that maybe wouldn't have been there if this technology wasn't there?
Yeah. I love that approach of using it as information, as data for the session, for that relationship, and for the work that you're doing with the client. I think that's a really novel and great way of looking at it. So I really appreciate that. Okay, so I could keep going on, but I want to be respectful of your time. So how do people contact you if they want to continue the conversation, if they want to reach out for some help?
Sure. So like most people, I'm on LinkedIn and I'm pretty easy to find because there aren't too many Vaile Wrights out there. And the other way would be to email our office. So it's the Office of Healthcare Innovation. So that's OHCI@apa.org. Email is usually the best way to get a hold of us and me and my team. Really excited to have been on this podcast, Ernest. Excited to hopefully people are interested in learning more for them to reach out. If they're interested in the resources I mentioned, please do email. You can also go to the apa.org website. Sometimes it's a little hard to navigate. So if you're finding you can't find stuff, please just reach out. We can hook you up with whatever you need.
Awesome. I think that's such a great resource for people to have. I'm glad that it was set up a few years ago. As I said before, very appropriate in terms of timing. All right. So always want to ask from my guests, what's a tip or a recommendation that you have for the audience? If nothing else, what should they be thinking about, paying attention to, or doing?
I know I've mentioned this already a few times, but the biggest thing I think is curiosity, right? Is to not just let the fear mongering and the stories persuade your perspective or your opinion on generative AI, but to really go play out yourself. And maybe don't start with work, right? Like the way I started was we used it to track our golf scores when we were out on the golf course. And it's amazing. It does it for you. And when I was playing poorly, it was giving me encouragement to play better, which was really lovely at the moment because golf is very hard. But you can use it for meal planning and for recipes. It's great at recipes. We also use it when we're not fighting, but trying to figure out what movie to watch. And
Yeah.
we'll put it in and it tells you what movie to watch. So it's a relationship saver in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's a great place to start. And then scaffold yourself up to thinking about, well, how could I use this in my work setting? What's a low level thing that I could be doing? One of the things I did was I used it to write my bio. It's much better at writing your bio than you are.
Yeah.
Because it just is. Check it out.
Is.
I promise.
Yeah. I love that. It just is. As someone who uses AI all the time and who I'm very transparent. I love AI. I use it all the time in everything that I do. I'm not sure what I would do without it. It's sit in the corner and cry somewhere. But I also know that as a psychologist, we also do great work. We also have great value. And so I think we can coexist with AI and do well. And so I love that advice. Start small, start playing with it. You ask it for movie recommendations, recipes, golf. So I think all of those are great advice. Vaile, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been such a pleasure. And I really hope you'll come back because we didn't even scratch the surface.
Happy to. I'd love to come back. And thanks for having me, Ernest.
Awesome. And for everybody else, if you've enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave us a review. Feedback is a gift and we love gifts. We hope you will join us again.